Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. We'll give everyone a few minutes for attendees to join, and then we'll kick off right at the top of the hour. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on the topic of Success After Sunset, Migrating to a New CLM Platform. My name is Seth Nesbitt. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Icertis and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items. First off, the audio for this webinar should stream through your speakers, and we have a dial-in if you're having any audio issues. If you need tech support, please use the chat window in your GoToWebinar panel, and someone will be able to assist you. We will reserve some time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A session, so please hold any questions until then, and we will absolutely get to them. And lastly, the slides and recording of this webinar will be available within the next 24 hours, and everyone will receive a follow-up email with that information. So with that out of the way, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Joining us, first off, we have Jason Bush, Managing Director, Solution Map and Strategic Advisory at Spend Matters. Jason is literally the closest thing to a household name in the procurement and supply chain space, and he's led the charge as an advocate and evangelist since Jason is giving away your age, since the 1990s. Jason established the Spend Matters brand, which has emerged to become the largest news and information portal covering the sector. And if you don't know the Spend Matters website and their information, I strongly encourage you to go take a look. I'm also very pleased to say we're joined today by special guest and Icertis customer, Deb Voronkov. Deb serves as the Corporate Records and Law Process Manager for Vertiv. Deb joined Vertiv, formerly known as Emerson Network Power, in November of 2009 is the Corporate Records Manager. Her focus is on developing and improving strong law operations, maximizing people, process, and technology. And last but certainly not least, we have Shanti Dev, Vice President of Professional Services here at Icertis. Shanti has 20 years plus of senior management experience in professional services, customer success, and sales. We really have a great agenda for you today, and we're going to kick things off with insights from Jason Bush. Following Jason's presentation, we'll run a quick audience poll and then follow up with a customer success story presented by Deb, and we'll end with Shanti and some information around Icertis' migration capabilities, and then we'll give you the opportunity to submit your questions to the webinar panel. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to get things kicked off. Jason, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth. It's excellent to be here today. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to give a recap of the history of Emptoris and really what has happened in the CLM market since Emptoris was a major player in it, and talk about some of the tips around general transitioning from existing platforms one might be on to new platforms. So some very quick background on us, and Seth, thank you for the quick intro. I won't bore everyone with it, but we are a combination of media and research when it comes to procurement and supply chain. CLM is one of our core areas we cover. We look at it both from a private sector perspective and a public sector perspective, and we look globally too, and even on an industry basis. I am the founder of Spend Matters, and I spend most of my time today still looking at technology, which is what I truly love. And ever since originally knowing Emptoris, it just amazes me how much progression we've seen in the CLM market, and we'll talk about that as well. Next slide, please. So it's really important to remember, and I'm sure we have some folks on the call who came from or are still on an Emptoris platform of some sort, whether it's sourcing, spend analysis, CLM, supplier management, or all of the above. Emptoris was a pioneer, and probably a little bit of a personal history lesson is in store here as well. Before I became an analyst in 2004, it seems like quite some time ago, I was at a competitor to Emptoris called Free Markets in the strategic sourcing space. And Free Markets was largely a consultancy with some software. Emptoris, however, approached this whole market as we might term strategic procurement, strategic contract management from a software perspective. And it's really pretty amazing what they did in retrospect. They were really probably the first provider to bring all these areas online at the same time, if not in a unified suite, at least in different modules that sometimes talk to each other effectively and ultimately would talk to each other a bit better. They really pioneered the concept of sourcing optimization. So long before the combined nets of the world and the trade extensions of the world, Emptoris built its own capability and even acquired a third-party capability called Mindflow. They popularized spend analysis. And spend analysis has now also morphed into contract analytics as well, a market Icertis is in too. But really the first to do that on a large scale. Emptoris acquired a company called Zborg and then Intigma as well to drive those efforts initially. They were also really the first suite vendor in the space to acquire supplier management capability in the form of Exitech. And probably most important of all, through the acquisition of Jakarta, they acquired and advanced a contract management solution. We'll talk a bit more about that whole area in a minute as it's the focus. But it's really amazing to think overall just how Emptoris pieced these things together. And they were really the first vendor, if you will, in a SaaS world to enable some type of kind of post-code customization. Not quite the configuration of cloud we think of today, but certainly not as difficult as traditional behind the firewall enterprise software. Next slide, please. So for all those which have followed kind of the Emptoris saga, you might remember after kind of a challenging period for the firm when Free Markets sued them for patent or IP infringement, Marlin Equity purchased it and then sold it to IBM not so far thereafter. IBM announced most recently last year that they were sunsetting Emptoris. And in reality, ever since IBM purchased it, most of the work done was what those internal to IBM would call blue washing, which was making it compatible with the IBM database structure and stack. And since IBM acquired Emptoris, there really wasn't a whole lot of progress that kept up with the market in terms of innovative features and functionality across the suite. And rather than selling it, IBM was kind enough to give customers really a long-term choice by sunsetting it. However, they announced a partnership with SAP Ariba, in which both organizations would work to transition customers to SAP Ariba. As we'll talk about in a minute, though, that's optional, and we do not recommend people just blindly jump to IBM's recommended partner who has commercial upside in that transition. They should really do their homework. SAP Ariba may be a great choice, but it's one of many choices. And given the financial economics of the partnership, customers need to make their own decisions. Next slide, please. So some highlights of the relationship itself. As I noted, IBM will work with SAP Ariba to bring new and existing IBM customers over to the SAP Ariba platform. It impacts roughly 200 customers. IBM will keep supporting cloud customers through May of 2020, so that was roughly a 3-year period since they announced it, or will be a 3-year period. And then IBM will keep providing patches as well, but will no longer enhance the solution. Those are just some of the summary requirements of what happened. Most important of all, it's important to remember this was not an acquisition. So there is no continued enhancement of functional development on the Emptoris platform. This is really a referral agreement and broader agreement around some AI collaboration to transition customers over to SAP Ariba. But as existing Emptoris customers should know, that is not mandatory. You've got lots of choice. And overall, what I'm going to talk about here going forward is not just related to Emptoris customers. What I want to get into is really how much the CLM market has changed since Emptoris was a pioneer, and just in general tips and tricks for transitioning from one platform to another. Next slide, please. So, and I'll leave you with this. If you really want to dig more closely into the relationship within Spend Matters, we offer a subscription product called Pro, which explores the partnership between the two providers, and offers a long list of possible alternatives for those considering a migration. Icertis obviously being a very strong candidate on the CLM side, which we refer to in our write-up. Next slide, please. So what's really key to remember here overall is that while SAP Ariba might be a great choice for Emptoris customers to migrate to, it's a choice. And any RFI process should be educational for all participants within it, whether you are doing a selection process on your own without the help of a consultancy or advisory firm, whether you're working with an advisory or consulting firm. We're actively involved in a number of advisory projects around Emptoris migration right now to other solutions. Regardless of, again, if you're working with a firm or not on it, this should be educational. And I'm going to hopefully share a few ideas coming up on the following slides around how much has changed. But it's key to remember this market has blossomed, and the technology has been enhanced so much, whether we're talking about analytics, whether we're talking about guided contracting, whether we're talking about the flexibility of workflow and rules and platforms, never having to get into the code again to accomplish some of the things you might have had to have done on Emptoris. It's really exciting what's happened in the market since then. At the same time, it's also important to think about just being in the market. Even though you might go through a technology evaluation process every 3 to 5 years, in reality, most people stick on the same solution, even if they're not entirely thrilled. We think that's the wrong idea. In fact, as we think about how fast technology progresses, we actually update our solution maps, which look and compare vendor technology every quarter, not every 3 to 5 years. And that's the pace of change today. So it's important to always be in the market. It's also important to think about choosing the right solution for you. So we and some others like to think of a persona-driven approach. And I'll talk about some buying personas for CLM in a minute. One size doesn't fit all. And being persona-driven adds a lot of flexibility. And then it's important to really write your RFIs in the right way. There's some links in the slides provided here to some research we've done and some recommendations for how do you write better RFIs in general. One thing that it comes down to is if you can do your homework first and really understand the technology landscape, understand how strong certain providers are, the RFI process can be very expressive. You can ask providers to really explain what makes them different versus having to do the Feature 500 checklist, which now, thanks to the available market research out there, you can do ahead of time. Next slide, please. So there are a number of factors to consider during a migration process. Some of this is specific onto CLM, but more broadly, as we can think about transitioning procurement, buy-side, sell-side technologies from one provider onto another. This is just kind of a quick laundry list, and I'll point to a few of the items on here. One is really thinking through the data management capabilities. So this gets into schemas and taxonomies, it gets into scalability, it gets into embedded analytics as well of the provider you're moving to, and then how difficult is it to get data out of the existing system. It's important to think about migration services and support as well. And then additional services beyond which an SI type of service might provide around change management, data enrichment, data science, and the likes. Open standards are important to point to as well. And then, are there additional capabilities that provider is offering which is related to you? And last but not least, what is the partner ecosystem of that provider you're thinking to during a transition process? Now, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about a few CLM specific factors in a transition. And in many cases, you will likely be using a CLM system differently than in the past simply because they're that much more effective today and you can do that much more. Maybe you used it in the past just as a repository, and for limited authoring capability, you might have used it, but now authoring is that much easier and better using newer CLM systems. But regardless, there's a few things to think about here. One is taking stock and locating all of your contracts, understanding all the fragmented data out there, doing contract discovery. You would like to think you've got all of your contracts in a single repository, but it's likely you've got obligations and contracts scattered across your enterprise. And the more you can take stock of it during a transition, the better. Even though you might have a CLM system already, having a strategy and a business case for a transition is key. What goals do you want to accomplish? How will they be measured? All very important. It's also important to think about stakeholders and what they care about and their needs and how they will measure the success as well. If procurement is driving a CLM transition, it's a little bit different than if legal is driving it or if it's primarily a sell-side exercise. But still, because CLM brings so much optionality between different organizations within a company and stakeholders, it's important to think about all those votes out there within the organization that matter. Get that basic repository in place as quickly as possible to demonstrate value. That's one thing we've seen that is a quick win. There's other quick wins such as digital signatures too. And then think about the plan to really expand the scope and value over time also. So what's changed if we go to the next slide? I hinted at some of this before, but simply put, and with deference to everything Emptoris did that was fantastic for the time, CLM has improved so much, and it has so many more adjacencies than back during the time that Emptoris was really one of the stronger solutions out there. So now we have all of these adjacencies CLM can tie into. We can think about how it ties into from a compliance standpoint, many different areas as well. And then once we get into all the specific components of what makes solutions better today, contract analytics, workflow, kind of this platform as a service concept, that it's easy to expand and build additional use cases and capability off of a core structure. And really a whole lot around authoring. So being able to not just model clauses at a high level, but really get into specific areas around commercial terms, around obligation types, around risk types. It is just simply so much better today from an authoring perspective than it was back in the day. It used to be if you had sufficient Microsoft Word integration and redlining, everything was hunky-dory. But what's happened today in terms of what you can expect in a solution is so much greater. At the same time, there's additional things, to seek out in solutions as well. So being able to do risk analysis on contracts. There's all of these new capabilities that providers offer, which really wasn't in the core knitting back in the day. But obviously the life cycle stays the same. So this is, and I apologize for kind of our confusing wheel chart we used to show the CLM landscape, but contracts start up with upfront specification and authoring, and obviously they go through to more than just a repository. But how do you take action over time? How do you think about monitoring and risk? How do you think about what happens upon expiration versus just auto renewal? And then obviously CLM needs to fit in the broader enterprise context too. Next slide, please. So as I begin to close down here and wind down, Let me get to other exciting parts of the presentation, and actually we want to involve you guys and make this active with some questions for the audience too. I'll leave you with our thought on how we look at CLM migration and selection, depending on circumstance. We do not take a one-size-fits-all approach. So we're very big on taking a persona-driven approach, and this is reflected in our research, looking at Icertis and many of its peers. People perform differently based on needs. Some organizations, based on our persona definitions, want an incredibly deep solution. So this is looking at kind of all the features and capabilities and taking a near straight line across in terms of, do they support, the absolute best authoring capability, the absolute best workflow engine, the absolute best, analytics and repository capabilities. Other solutions and other needs and persona approaches might be more keen to understand what are the maximum limits of configurability. Can I do more with this today in a cloud world where I'm not getting into code around customization, but I can configure to my heart's content for my own needs without touching the code? Some organizations want a turnkey approach where, there's loaded analytics and KPIs. You might even get into kind of a fully loaded turnkey approach, with pre-configured templates and such as well, or through the implementation process, you're assigning and defining all those areas for the organization to use. And then finally, we have a CIO-friendly persona, which really looks at integrations and other areas based on, very deep IT requirements. In reality, you're probably all of these to some degree. You might be 80% deep, you might be 20% turnkey, but regardless of kind of suspending, in disbelief for a minute, it's important to think in terms of personas. And yes, you're likely multiple personas, and that doesn't mean you're a conflicted personality. But thinking in these terms will get you outside of the one-size-fits-all approach. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Seth to ask the first poll question we have.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was fantastic. I have to say, I don't think there's anybody out there in the marketplace who's covered the Emptoris news and acquisition with as much depth and insight as you have. And that was a great summary. And I would, again, encourage people to go look. There's a ton of great information up at Spend Matters. As Jason said, we are running a poll, just a quick poll from the audience to see where everyone is in their migration journey. We're going to leave this poll up here for about a minute, minute and a half, just to let people log on. While they're doing that, Jason, I really enjoyed your presentation. I think you called out, how different the CLM world has gotten, particularly in the area of functionality, integration to other systems. I wonder if you could touch on another key aspect about how much easier it is to implement. Many of these people may have implemented Emptoris when it was behind the firewall, desktop, one of these older versions. That's been a big breakthrough in this space in the intervening years as well. Do you just want to touch on that briefly?
Absolutely. I mean, a huge thing here has been just the advent of configuration and the ability, if you want, you can mirror, if you're transitioning, the same complexity you had before on a customized Emptoris or other CD environment from a CLM system or kind of early customized SaaS version, often in a matter of months. We're not even talking quarters, right? So you can mirror that complexity if you want, or you can move to more of a best practice. I mean, a lot of folks we see within CLM, when they take the time to do a transition, they often look at themselves and say, why did we do it this way before? Well, maybe without naming names, a big SI was telling us to because it was perhaps in their interest. But you can also take the time to move to best practice. Kind of the rule of thumb we like to say is configuration, provided the provider is friendly to configure, can save you, between 80 to 90% of the time versus customization to get what you want. So you can start getting value super fast.
No, that's a great summary, and I agree. It's certainly been our experience, and Shanti will talk on that. This is an order of magnitude quicker and easier than what people think of as these big enterprise software applications of the past. So definitely an important aspect. Well, great. It looks like we've gotten almost everyone to take the poll. Let's go convert over and show our results here. Okay, we've got about 50% are researching, 25% are actually actively considering specific platforms. We've got some customers who are migrating right now, and we've got some people who are already up and running on their new CLM platform. That's great. Jason, other members of the panel, any comments? Anything surprised you here? This looks just about what we expected to see, but it's kind of interesting to see what's going on out there. Jason, anything?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, we look at lots of technology areas, and I would have guessed, the process of migration around 10%. That's definitely higher than if we said some, random other area, whether it was e-procurement or whether it was strategic sourcing, or whether it was another area on the sell side. So I think because of the Emptoris situation, there are more folks who've been established on something who are migrating right now. A lot of folks out there on the fence, it is just a great time to look at CLM for the first time. And chances are you've done something in the past, maybe without even everyone knowing it. But if you're talking about soup to nuts CLM from authoring, repository, analytics, risk, there are just some great choices out there now. And one thing we like to say is just the stuff works. It used to be a science project, and hopefully you would get what you wanted out of it, or 70%. But today, your chance of being satisfied is so much greater than it was back in the day.
That's fantastic. Really good. Well, thank you so much again, Jason. We'll come back to you with some questions at the end. We're now going to switch gears and hear from Deb Voronkov from Vertiv. Deb is going to walk us through why Vertiv decided to research a new CLM platform, details around their migration process, and some of the next steps on the horizon for Deb and Vertiv. Deb, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm Deb Voronkov, and I'm do the legal processing and records management here at Vertiv. We are a new company, and we were a spinoff from Emerson Electric Company, where we were under as Emerson Network Power for about 25 years. A year and a half ago, Emerson decided that it was time to let us go, and we had about 6 to 9 months to decide what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, and how we were going to replace all the technology that Emerson did for us into our new company. This began sort of a new way of thinking about contracts in the organization. We were very lean, and we did not have any tools of our own. And the tools that we had, we got the ability to replace tools that were at Emerson. Emerson had an Emptoris environment. From the sounds of it, they were early adapters of that Emptoris system, and it had not been upgraded in about 10 years. And so people's experiences with it were rough, and most of the contracts that were put into that system weren't created, but they were created within the tool that they were using it as a records repository. So we were also tasked with only lifting and shifting what we had, because Emerson was paying for this transition, and so they didn't want us to build a better system than they had, but we had to lift and take all the contracts that were currently in place in their Emptoris environment and then get them into our new environment. The general counsel at the time had the vision that if we were going to buy a tool, it needed to be one tool that would work for the entire organization, for sales and for buy-side contracts, because the the buy-side piece of our organization was very, very small compared to the sell side for contracts. And so we wanted to get something that may not be a perfect fit for everyone, but a tool that would work well for everyone and give us better than we had currently had. Next slide, please. So we went through a process with a cross-functional team where I had people from sales, legal, procurement, and IT all involved in trying to identify the best of breed tool from a couple years ago. So we looked at 20 different tools, and we RFP'd 8 vendors, and we had 220 requirements that they needed to meet. A key differentiator, and one of the reasons why we picked Icertis were these factors here. So all documents were OCR'd and full text searchable. So our back file was going to be as good as anything we were creating in the system. We wanted to be able to manage contracts in all languages. We're in about 106 different countries. And our Chinese associates, it's a very pretty heavy presence, and the Chinese people themselves that work for us don't speak English. It's not very common for our Chinese procurement people to speak English, so we needed the GUI and the interface to be able to be displayed in whatever the local language was for the people that were using the tool. and Chinese was a key distinguisher. So some of the tools did multiple languages, but they did not do the Chinese characters. We wanted, let's see, another key piece was making sure as we were negotiating contracts, if we were changing data that was metadata value, that like an effective date or an entity name or an address, if we were changing it while we were negotiating the contract, that data would push back into the metadata and we wouldn't have a gap between what was in the contract and what was in the metadata when it was originally created. And then the other piece was, because we knew change was going to be constant with our new environment, we didn't want to have to go back to the vendor to make changes. We wanted to be able to make changes on the fly in the configuration and not have to do a change order. The one thing that's been very common in the last year and a half for us is change. So at the time when we were selecting this tool, we didn't even know what our company name was going to be. And now we've been through quite a lot of reorganizations and entity name changes in the subsequent year and a half, and we know that there's more of that to come. Next slide, please. So how we did this was, again, this lift and shift methodology. So we downloaded all of our clauses from Emptoris and put them on a SharePoint site. We had clauses and templates in 4 different languages, so in English, Mandarin, Portuguese, and Spanish. We had templates for logistics agreements, non-disclosure agreements, direct procurement agreements, indirect procurement agreements, and real estate agreements. And then we had the agreements themselves. And so there, we had quite a pretty structured parent-child relationship between master agreements and then child agreements. So we had 600 direct procurement agreements and 250 indirect procurement agreements. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges we had is we were becoming our own company. So, but we couldn't really make any changes until the switch flipped and we became our own company. So we needed to sort of review the clauses and create holes and metadata spaces in those clauses so that when we got our new company name and we were allowed to be our new selves, we could flip the switch and that metadata would turn into Vertiv. We also needed to know and wanted to be a little bit easier to do business with. So we wanted to review these clauses and see what did we really want to use and what did we not want to use, what was too restrictive, and how did we want to make it a little bit easier. And then we created new paper around that. Same thing with our templates. We wanted to simplify the process that we had. So we went from having a 26-page business unit supply agreement to a 3-page participation agreement. Really in the purpose of trying to make it easier to do business, but yet still protect the company. So we really had to go do an analysis of what we had, and then where did we want to be, and how did we get there. Additionally, we needed to go through we downloaded all of the contracts that we had that were Emerson as our parent, and then we had to go through a process where we created assignments. So even though we had lifted the contracts, not all of them were going to go into the system because the companies weren't going to assign the rights from the parent over to us as a new company. So a lot of those contracts had to be renegotiated. Next slide, please. So I was very lucky, and I had a team of 3 interns to help me through this very, very quick process. So within 3 months, we procured a tool. We had Icertis in-house starting to configure the tool, identifying all of our clauses, identifying our templates, and identifying which contracts we had that were going to go into the tool. I had 3 interns that helped me, first of all, go through those clauses, create just plain Word documents out of them so that we could pass that information on to Icertis to do the configuration. And then we took the contracts that we had, and I created a SharePoint site with metadata tags that we were mapping to what we were configuring in Icertis, and they started indexing out the data into the SharePoint environment so we could then import the data through Excel utility. We couldn't, the way that Icertis works is you can't necessarily get things into the system until you have it configured. So this was a pre-step for us to get that configuration done, or as much of it done to match, so that when we went live as a new company and we couldn't get access to the contracts I think it was October 31st, we needed to be live November 1st. And so we were doing as much pre-work as we could before we flipped the switch. Let's see, so that's sort of how we did it. So the team of summer interns kind of read through the agreements, pulled out the key values. We knew there was basic bibliographic data that we were going to need to pull out of them. We indexed them into SharePoint, and then we imported them through the Excel utility from an export from SharePoint. Next slide, please. So we also added a field to SharePoint that when we got an assignment confirmed, we knew that that was ready to be migrated. We installed the Excel add-in, and then we sorted the contracts by parent-child. So we couldn't add child agreements unless we had a parent agreement in the system. And we had a very structured, at Emerson, there was a very structured system of parent-child relationships with the logistics agreements as well as the direct procurement agreements. So we had to sort of when we exported the data from Emptoris, it really came to us in a numbered format with all of the contracts and the attachments in a folder with a document number on it. We needed to sort of crack that open and rearrange it to be able to get it into Icertis in the right way. Next slide, please. So we started with about 750 contracts. We went live on January 3rd, 2017. We spent about 3 weeks over in China getting all the Chinese agreements and the structure and the metadata and the language properly configured and corrected so that it would work for our Chinese associates. And so it slowed our project down a little bit because we weren't expecting to have to go over there and really work with them. But because of the time difference and language difficulties, it really made a lot of sense for us to do that, and it was time well spent. So we went live with 750 contracts, and this slide is a couple months old, but we're now at just about 6,000 contracts. So we've been really growing, and user adoption has been tremendous. What we will really find is in our APAC area, which is our Asia Pacific and China area, when we went live with the system, when we migrated the data from Emptoris, there was 180 contracts for China. And now we're at over 2,000 contracts that we have in the system. And those aren't new contracts. That's really kind of legacy agreements and information that we had no visibility into before. So the time that we spent over there with them was really well spent, and they have become great adopters of the system. And now we have access to what our spend is under contract. So we take all of this data from Icertis, we dump it into a Hadoop environment where we do data analytics and contract analytics to our spend analytics software, and we're able to see where we are. And the Asia Pacific region went from being about 20 or 30% to now 80% with spend under contract. So it's a real success story there. And everyone else is sort of getting there and running along. So I think we've made quite a lot of progress in the last year. Next slide, please. So we're now in the process. So as I said, the vision was for the tool that we selected to be the tool for the entire company. So all contracts will be in this system. But it was a lift and shift, so we could only do the buy side of the house first. And now we're handling, and it was also a very short and condensed time frame where everybody was working on lots of things. So we had that done. We went live for about a year, and now we're starting to do the other parts of the house. So we're doing our vendor management organization, which is our IT agreements, software as a service, things of that nature. We're doing legal agreements. We went to Colombia and had all of our associates from Central and Latin America come together to combine to figure out how do we configure procurement agreements for Central and Latin America. And we're expected to go live with all of this by the summer. We're rolling out the vendor management organization in April. So we're redesigning how we kind of go to market. We changed where that organization lived in the organization, and then we're pushing out those changes in the next couple of weeks. It's a phased approach, so we're trying to get as much done as quickly as we can, but we don't want to wait months and months to roll everything out at the same time to get the bang for our buck. We're also starting to look at our sales side of the house. And the challenge with our sales agreements is 80 to 90% of those agreements are on third-party paper. So we're looking at artificial intelligence that Icertis is beta testing. We're beta testing it with them to see if we can pick up those key bibliographic data and other data that are baked inside of those contracts that otherwise somebody would have to key. So we're just starting to do that artificial intelligence deep dive now. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Deb. That was fantastic. I love the juxtaposition between Jason talking about large SIs having implemented, and you had a team of interns, and I know they weren't implementing, but they were kind of a key part of the process. Wow, what a difference. That was fantastic, and I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope I know the audience found it useful. We will also get back to you with a few questions at the end, I think. But now let me turn it over to Shanti Dev from the Icertis side, who's going to walk us through some insights on how you can set yourself up for a successful migration. Shanti, take it away.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Jason and Deb. There was an excellent set of presentations leading to a logical discussion on how we can help customers go through a migration path from Emptoris or even a non-Emptoris implementation. So what I want to do is give the attendees a good overview of the Icertis Professional Services Organization. We are a global team with team members in different parts of the world, in Seattle, Silicon Valley, in New Jersey, supporting our North American customers, with offices in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Zurich, with resources in each of those locations to support our European and EMEA customers, and then a team in Pune that has additional resources to support our customers globally. A fast-growing organization. We have close to about 90 plus people going through the end of February. It'll grow to about 150 plus people by the end of this year. Primarily driven by the growth of the company in multiple verticals and multiple regions. One of the things we have focused on very, very carefully is the kinds of folks we bring into our team. I do believe the Icertis professional services team has the deepest CLM skills anywhere in the market today. And that's a matter of pride for us, because that is the only way we can ensure that we deliver a high quality solution to our customers. And to make that happen, what we have done is focused on bringing very experienced people who have a set of domain experiences from the CRM, CLM, supply chain management, ERP, and consulting skills. A combination of those are required for us to be able to deliver a complex contracting lifecycle management solution. Next slide, please. So what are the key differentiators in what we bring to the table? One is a proven methodology. We've got close to about 90 plus implementations with global customers live across the globe. And for each of these implementations, we have the ability to adapt our methodology to support the customer's specific implementation need and their ability to adopt any of the three approaches. A waterfall implementation, which is about 50-60% of the cases, that's what we see, or a hybrid implementation where part of the implementation is purely waterfall up to about the requirements phase, and then we go to a sprint-based implementation as we go into the build and delivery side. And then I'd say about 10% of our customers prefer to go implement in a purely agile methodology. And the team we have and the methodology we have allows us to adapt that for each of the specific customer needs. Beyond the methodology, we also have a center of excellence that is made up of experts who have worked on multiple projects. And each implementation at the right stage has to go through a review with the center of excellence. The objective there is, as we are doing these 40 plus implementations at any given time that are in different stages of implementation for different verticals, we are able to bring in those best practices and share that with any current implementation. And that has a huge impact in making sure that every implementation is getting the review from more than just the implementation team, but a panel of experts who are working on multiple projects. The proven methodology and a strong center of excellence for best practices. On top of that, we also have a fairly rigorous entry-exit criteria from each of the implementation phases. And these entry and exit criteria are pretty tightly managed by the PMO office that we have and our program managers to make sure we're ensuring the quality of our delivery and nothing is slipping through the process uh, at any given time. And we'll talk a little more about the stage gates when we cover the high-level implementation methodology itself. So these three topics I talked about, the implementation methodology, the center of excellence, the stage gates, all allow us to provide a fairly rapid implementation. On an average, our implementations are anywhere between 4 to 6 months. 4 is a low complexity implementation with very few integrations. And 6 is about an average where we have multiple contract type, multiple templates, multiple integrations, and legacy migration. In the larger global implementations, where we have phased implementation, even there we have the objective of having a 4 to 6 month release. So customers are able to see the value of an Icertis implementation in a fairly rapid fashion. We already talked about the skills and the expertise of the professional services team, so I will move on to the last part, is the CLM domain expertise. We do have pretty much, I would say, if you take a look at the CLM products in the market, and if you look at the pure SaaS providers, from the end-to-end CLM capability from a product standpoint and from an implementation capability, I think we pretty much stand out as one of the leaders in this area. The uniqueness of what Icertis brings to the table is not only we help in implementing an end-to-end contract lifecycle management solution, we also do all the legacy migrations ourselves, and we also do all the integrations ourselves. That gives the customer pretty much a one-stop shop for all their needs, and all these three capabilities, the end-to-end implementation, legacy migrations, and integrations, are typically delivered within a 4 to 6 month time frame. And you heard in Deb's presentation on what they have been able to achieve, and that is very typical of what we've been able to deliver for many of our customers. Let's move on to the next one, please. The other focus area we have in all our implementations is to focus on business value. This is an eye chart, so I won't go through each of the, all the details in these pillars. But the idea here is that during the sales cycle and during the early stages of the implementation, we try to understand very clearly what are the business drivers that have decided a customer to select, to decide to implement a CLM solution. And once we understand those business drivers, we match the industry best practices to make sure we are providing a business impact. And early enough in the implementation, we identify what are the key KPIs that we will measure through the implementation and post-implementation that can give a clear indication on the business value we are providing to the customer and allow the customer then to be able to calculate an ROI post-implementation. This is a key part, differentiating aspect of the Icertis CLM implementation. And we get into a lot of details in this area during the first 2 weeks of the requirements gathering and the design phase of the project. Next slide, please. A quick overview of the Icertis legacy migration methodology, very much aligned to the presentation that we saw from Deb on what are the things we go through. So at a high level, in a 30 to 60 day period on an average, the first thing we take a look at is what does the customer have today in their current repository? What are the types of contracts that are in there? How many associations are in there? And from that, very quickly identify a migration pool. What contracts does the customer want us to migrate? And we have a number of best practices there that we help the customer prioritize what needs to be moved. And then we define the ICM repository structure. Customers have typically two major use cases with their legacy contracts. Some of them purely want that in the repository as a single location for all contracts, current and past. Others bring the legacy contracts into ICM for them to be able to then use the same workflows we are designing for the new contracts for their legacy contracts. Those are some of the decisions that customers make on an individual basis. Once the repository is set up with the end-to-end contract lifecycle flow, then we start configuring the migration utility, which allows the customer to, once they've identified all the metadata, provide us that information in our Excel utility, and then be able to go through the migration execution itself. There are multiple steps that we go through during the migration execution, including reviewing and preparing the data and actually execution of the migration. And then multiple steps for the verification that we do as part of our internal QA process, and then the customer validates that through the UAT process and then certifies the migration. On an average, 60-70% of our customers today have legacy migration as part of their implementation. And this is an area of deep expertise that the Icertis professional services team has today. Number of customer stories, in addition to what we've already heard, we can look at the names we're talking about in different verticals. In the software high-tech space, big names like Microsoft. In the software services space, companies like Mindtree, a very large pharmaceutical company, automotive with Daimler. In each of these different verticals, the business problem has been pretty much the same. A lack of an integrated contract management solution, the first step in the digitization efforts, and then also the ability to bring in all their legacy contracts. And in each of these cases, these have been very successful implementations within the first phase within the 4 to 6 month time frame. And this is something we would like to offer anybody on the call who has a need, and we can pick that up post the webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, Shanti. I hope the audience found that information useful and helpful. If you're looking for additional information to support you on your CLM migration journey, please feel free to check out the resources you're seeing on your screen, and you can find them at icertis.com/toolkit. And there's some examples of the kind of information you'll see there on the website. If you're in those early to mid stages of potentially researching this, we think you'll find some useful stuff there. We do have a few minutes left, and we'll now open up to the audience to submit questions. You can submit your questions in the questions window of the GoToWebinar panel. We'll get through as many as possible, and however, I'll just say, if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with every question that's asked over email, so just bear with us, because I think we've got quite a few coming in, but we will follow up to every single one. So there's already been a couple for Deb. There's a couple around the same sort of area here. People phrase it a couple different ways, but it's essentially, what was your experience with adoption? Always kind of an interesting question as you're going to a new platform. You mentioned it in your talk, but and a couple people are interested about training, adoption, usage, etc. How would you summarize that?
It helps if I take myself off mute.
Oh, great. Perfect.
You know, I would say our Asia Pacific team has really gotten into the picture of adoption in terms of getting what they had, legacy contracts, into the system. They're still a little bit slow in creating those agreements in the tool. Our US team is doing fantastic, and we're doing really amazingly with no-touch NDA process. So that's been our most successful, and we have kind of our biggest salespeople and our biggest procurement people using the system for basically a no-touch NDA. So they go and they create it, unless there's anything that happens in negotiation within the NDA, then they can create it and get it signed within like 5-10 minutes. And so that's been really huge in terms of adoption. I will tell you, the system and the people who had been using the Emptoris system, because it hadn't been upgraded in so long, they were just really unhappy with it. And when I did training, I did a lot of individual hands-on training, classroom training. And when people first got into the system, they literally giggled at how easy it was to use. And these were men giggling, and it was kind of fun to watch. And now as we go through the system, I spent the first couple months doing almost like office hours and doing a different topic of training 2 or 3 times a week for an hour so that different people could sort of drop into the training, ask questions as they use it. Now I do whenever we have quite a big group of people, and some people don't use it for a couple of months, and so I always try to make myself available through Skype or through, they can ping me or call me if they have a question, and I walk them through. I also have a resource in the Philippines who works with our team over in Asia and in Europe, and she's prepared some amazing training materials and does live training once a month with people. So the more people use it, the easier it is for them to use, and the more comfortable they are with it. We're redeploying a relaunch in our Europe group because they've seemed to be the slowest people to adopt, and we're doing that next week.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really good information. That's useful to know. Like I said, there's a number of questions around this. Always an interesting area. Next question is for Jason. Could you elaborate on the CLM buying personas? And knowing you've got 4 of them, maybe you can also point people where to go to find more information about them.
Sure, absolutely. So when we look at procurement technology in general, and obviously that cascades over to non-procurement in the form of sell-side CLM too, we like to think in terms of different buying personas. With our solution map methodology and benchmark, we typically have 5 personas. I shared 4, which we use for CLM: deep, configurator, turnkey, and CIO friendly. We also add to this a nimble persona in other areas, and we'll be adding a nimble CLM persona as well soon too. It just seems the nimble persona has been more common in other areas besides CLM to date. But you can find much more information about this, and you can see our charts on the CLM market and other markets on spendmatters.com. Just go to the solution map section. Our charts are free. We kind of use them as a teaser to get people to want to peel the onion around the data behind them. We think in general a lot of kind of 2x2 charts are silly to charge money for, whereas some other analyst firms do it. Maybe they have great stuff, and in many cases they do, but the charts themselves aren't what is helpful. It's really the data under it. So if you want to see how the CLM market looks, based on those we've done comparative analysis on, again, would encourage you to go to Spend Matters and look at the solution map section. And then if you are intrigued, you can begin to peel the onion. You can contact us.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Some more questions coming in for Deb. Not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but I thought we'd try. How are the suppliers and customers adopting or reacting to the migration to the Icertis in particular? They have to interact with the counterparty of contract negotiation, Redline. Do you have any insight into how that's going?
We didn't purchase the portal that goes with it, so we're doing it all through broadcasting through the system. So to our suppliers, they don't see anything different. But if they are updating the document and they update the date field, for example, in the right place, it automatically pushes the data back. So it's, other than using DocuSign, which is sort of new for some suppliers, we haven't had any feedback. And usually they're pretty quick to use the DocuSign. I think it's become pretty commonplace now.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, the whole process is now digitized. That's great. Looks like we have time for maybe one more. Shanti, this one is for you. What tools, if any, do you use to check and certify the data quality in this migration? and can the tool fix these quality issues as part of the process, essentially to create a new PDF with better quality. So talk about sort of data quality when you're migrating.
Yeah, so data quality is a multi-step process. Initially, when we start a migration process, we identify a subset of the contract that we want to test out, and they usually represent the portfolio of legacy contracts that the customer wants to bring in. So as we go through the sample data migration, we come up with the verification methods for that particular customer. Some of it is manual, some of it is automated, and as we go more to the ML AI route over the next 6 to 12 months, there will be ability for us to add more automation. So at this point in time, a lot of the data quality verification validation is I would say mostly manual with some amount of automation built in, headed towards the direction of more automation over the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. In fact, you heard it here first. Deb sort of mentioned the exciting beta work with the AI stuff, which is fantastic. This is clearly going to be a game changer. So, we are right at the top of the hour. We like to respect people's time. With this, I will conclude today's webinar. I do want to thank all of our presenters again, along with everyone from the audience who listened in today. Just as a reminder, there's a number of questions that came in here we weren't able to get to, and we absolutely will follow up with everyone individually. And our last comment is, for a deeper look into the features and functionality of the Icertis platform, feel free to register for our next group demo on March 28th. And you can register on our website on the See a Demo button, or please feel free to reach out. If you have any other additional questions, we'd look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, everyone, and especially to our presenters. Thanks for spending the hour with us. Take care.